Okay, for this set of notes, you should have the Molecules of Life page in front of you, and we're going to go ahead and get started because we have talked about these four things, these four molecules of life so far, but you might not have realized just how important they were. You might not have realized how they all fit together, and so we're going to explicitly talk about this on this page. So the molecules of life are defined as classes of organic compounds that are important to organisms. And things important to us normally help us live. So basically, these are the molecules, the organic molecules that give us life. So the basic molecule of an organic compound is called a monomer, which literally means one part. So if we're just talking about one little part of the molecule, like one little section of it, we'll call it a monomer. But if we have a bunch of monomers together, they form polymers. And maybe you've heard that word before. Polymer just means many parts. You also might see molecules or polymers being called macromolecules, and macro just means big, and molecules is just a part. So macromolecule is just saying a big part, as opposed to many parts. You can use either one. And molecules of life, like I said, are organic. And I included this reminder up here. Reminder that organic in science means it has a backbone made of carbon. If you don't learn anything else in this class, I beg you that you remember that organic means carbon. Organic doesn't mean natural or healthy or good, better than other things. No, in science, organic literally means that it has a lot of carbon. Okay? And so, these four molecules that we're about to talk about here, since they're all organic, what does that mean? That they all have carbon. Okay? So, carbohydrates is the first one that we're going to talk about. Carbohydrates, you might know the word because we talk about carbs pretty often. So carbs, carbs function to give us energy. So when I asked on your discussion questions, why do animals eat or why do humans eat? A lot of you might have put so they can live, and that's not a wrong answer because yes, we do have to eat food in order to live, but why do we have to eat the food? We have to eat the food because that food, those carbohydrates, get broken down and they provide us energy. So if we didn't eat for like maybe a couple hours, then we kind of get like, tired or whatever. And then if you eat, hopefully you eat, a balanced meal and it has some carbs in it, you'll eventually get your energy back because we get energy from our carbs. Also, carbohydrates are cool because they are a structural component. They're a structural component not in plants or not in animals, but in plants. So the cell walls are made of a carb. Cellulose is a carb. And in arthropods, so things with an exoskeleton, things that are crunchy when you step on them, Their exoskeleton is made of chitin. That's how you say that word, chitin, and it is a carb. Okay, so like I said, carbohydrates are organic. They have carbon, but they also are really cool because they have hydrogen and oxygen in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. For example, if there is only one carbon, there are then going to be 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. And it will always be like this, but you could see it in a different form. You could see it not as a reduced ratio. So if you look over here, this example, C6H12O6, if you reduce that, you get C is 1, and then how many times does 6 go into 12? 2. How many times does 6 go into 6? 1. So you have a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio, even though the numbers didn't say 1 to 2 to 1. Okay? So carbohydrates are made up of smaller things. Their monomers are called monosaccharides. From your bio terms, you'll eventually know that mono means one and saccharide means sugar. So this literally means one sugar or simple sugars. And examples of simple sugars all end in ose. But examples are ribose, glucose, our favorite. One other you might have heard of, lactose, that is a sugar, and sucrose. Another example that I didn't include, but it is one you might have heard of, fructose. If you hear of high fructose corn syrup, the type of sugar that's in the corn syrup is fructose. So if you have a bunch of these little sugar molecules, like you have hundreds of glucose, or you have some ribose and some glucose and some lactose, whatever, a different combination, but you have a bunch of them, you have many of them, the polymer will be called, easy enough, polysaccharides. Poly meaning many and saccharide meaning sugar. So it literally just has a bunch of sugar molecules, a bunch of these sugar molecules chained together in starches. So if you are eating a nice big bowl of pasta, which is my favorite meal, it will have a lot of starch, or like potatoes have a lot of starch. So they're big molecules of sugar that take a while to be broken down. So if you eat a big plate of pasta, you're not immediately going to be ready to run a marathon. Maybe the next day or in a few hours you could, because it takes a while to break down those big, big, big carbohydrate molecules. So next we'll move on to the other type of molecule, which is nucleic acids. And I'm positive that you've heard of these. You might not have known this word nucleic acid, but you have heard of examples of them. So nucleic acids are super, 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 super important in our bodies because they carry genetic information. They carry genetic information and then also direct the production of proteins. And we've already talked some about proteins and how important they are. So nucleic acids are even more important because they tell what proteins to produce, because the sequences of bases on the nucleic acid determine the arrangement of the protein monomer amino acids, which we'll talk about more in a second. So nucleic acids, like I said, are super important because they carry the genetic information. In humans, for example, it's in the form of our DNA. Our DNA is a nucleic acid. So it carries our DNA, and our DNA directs the production of proteins. So our DNA is red and it produces proteins. And if that's still kind of iffy, I promise you, you will have such a hang of DNA and proteins and all of this because we talk about it a lot. So if it's still kind of fuzzy now, don't worry, this is not the last time we're going to talk about it. So, like everything else, nucleic acids is the big polymer, and the monomer, if you break down the nucleic acid, the monomer is just called a nucleotide. And the nucleotide consists of a sugar, a phosphate group, and a nitrogen base. And you will be drawing these on your picture sheet, whatever you want to call it, that is accompanying this. You'll be drawing the nucleotide with the sugar and the phosphate group and the nitrogen base. We will go over to proteins now. Kind of a weird order, but we're going to do it. So proteins are, like I said, super important, but there are a lot of misconceptions or confusions that y'all might have about what proteins are or how we use them. So we are going to talk about this now. So proteins, they are made up of amino acids. So keep it straight because it's easy to get nucleic acids and amino acids confused because they both end in acid, but nucleic acids and amino acids are completely separate things. Amino acids make up proteins. So the polymer, if a bunch of amino acids are chained together, they could be called polypeptides. Remember, poly just means many peptides, and more commonly, we will refer to them as just proteins. And like I said, proteins have a ton of pretty different uses because they're very, very versatile. So the first one that we'll talk about is a structural component. Proteins make up our muscle fibers. They make up collagen, which is a protein found in our skin that helps us look youthful and not wrinkly. And keratin, which is what makes up our hair and our nails. I'm going to put a little asterisk right here so I know that this note down here at the bottom refers to this part right here. I'd like for you to do the same. Just put a little star there next to muscle fiber because that's very important. So the muscles that you have in your body are made up of different types of proteins. And they also make up different parts of your appearance, like your skin, the things in your skin that help keep it tight, keep wrinkles away, and keratin for your hair and your nails. The other type, I'm going to actually underline this part, structural enzymes are another type of protein, of function of protein, and enzymes, you might have heard of them before, but enzymes speed up chemical reactions. But they're pretty cool because they're not used in the chemical reaction. So different types of proteins can help processes in your body work a lot faster, and then they aren't used in the reaction. They can go on to the next process to help speed that one up. If we didn't have proteins that functioned as enzymes, we probably would not be living as a species, because a lot of the processes that make us function are pretty complex, and so they wouldn't happen, or they're really slow. They wouldn't happen unless we had these enzymes. And so an example of this is lactase. That's an enzyme. Lactase is the enzyme that breaks down lactose. So if you don't have that lactase enzyme, you cannot break down lactose, and then if you ingest lactose through, ice cream or milk or whatever, cheese, then your body can't break it down because it can't go through that process because it doesn't have that enzyme to help it. Enzymes are also really important. They only work on specific molecules. So lactase is the specific molecule for lactose. They fit like a lock and a key. Like lactase will look like one thing and lactose will fit into it perfectly, and then they can get broken down. But a different enzyme, say sucrase, couldn't come in and break down lactose because they don't fit together. Okay, another type of function of proteins are to work as peptide hormones. So hormones is just a substance produced in one organ that affects another organ. This allows for communication within an organism through proteins. So say something is going wrong in your body, it can send out these peptide hormones to other parts of your body that will then produce a response. A pretty common peptide hormone that you might have heard of is insulin. So people with diabetes, their pancreas doesn't produce insulin to help break down sugar in their body. Okay, so we've come to this note that we noted up here. So, lots of times this has happened before, and I'm not saying that y'all would make this mistake or make this error, but it is a pretty common thing. When we think of proteins, you think of things that you eat. Because if you're like, I'm on a high protein diet, or I'm drinking a protein shake, okay, that is not really how you get energy. We get energy from the carbohydrates up here that we break down. So if you're like strictly on a protein diet of steaks, and literally that's all you eat is steaks, you're not going to be a very healthy person. Even though you have so much protein in your body, it's not going to help you because you're not going to have that much energy. You will have a lot of amino acids to help build muscle. So if you are trying to bulk up or whatever, for sports, whatever it might be, if you're just trying to get stronger, yes, you should have proteins because proteins help make up your muscles. So if you're trying to get bigger muscles, you need proteins. But if you have a strict diet of proteins, you're not going to get anywhere. You need a balanced diet. So when we talk about, the protein that we eat, the steak that we eat, it's only protein because it's other organisms' muscle fibers. Don't know if you knew that or not, but hopefully you did if you've been eating steak all your life. You realize that it's muscle fibers from other organisms. Albeit very tasty muscle fibers, it's still made of protein. That's why we get protein. So when we eat meats high in protein, and not necessarily even meats, nuts have high protein. Lots of things have high protein. Plants even can have protein. So when we eat certain meats, though, is mainly what we think about. When we eat these meats high in protein, we are eating other organisms' muscle fibers, and we do not get energy from it. That is super important, and I want you to know that. You don't get energy from protein, but it does help you build more muscle or stronger muscles, but you wouldn't eat a steak and then immediately be energized. No, it helps your muscles recover and build, is why you might drink a protein shake before you go to work out, because it helps your muscles. It doesn't give you energy. Okay? Is that clear? Hopefully, because it's super important. And there are so many functions for proteins that I had to leave some off. I didn't mention that they're in our cell membrane for transport. I didn't mention that they make up our traits, like all these things. Proteins are so, 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 so important. Okay, we're going to move on to our last molecule of life, our lipids. Lipids, you might know of as fats, but we'll talk about them a little more. So if you are talking about fats, lots of times you'll think about the fat that is stored on the body. So the reason that we have reserves of fat on our body is because it is where we store our energy. That's one of the things that lipids do. So when we eat maybe a lot of carbs, like if we're eating a big dish of pasta for every meal, we won't need all of that energy right away. And so our body still thinks we have to store it because, I don't know, when's our next meal going to come? Our body still doesn't like to get rid of it. It likes to store it. So that way, if we get left on a deserted island, we won't immediately die. We'll have some energy in our fat storage. Thank goodness. Another thing that lipids do that we've already talked about is membrane formation. Specifically, cell membrane formation. And also steroid hormones, which are naturally occurring in our body. They're not like the steroids that you hear people take. Steroids do occur naturally in our body in the form of like testosterone and estrogen and progesterone. Those are all types of steroids. People can't abuse those by injecting them, but they do just happen naturally in our body. Lipids consist of a glycerol, on the second bullet here, glycerol, and 3 fatty acids. Some examples of common lipids are fat, fat is the animal product that's usually solid at room temperature. So think bacon grease. Bacon grease is a fat. So if your family is like mine and you like to save your bacon grease for future cooking and you just have a bowl of bacon grease in your fridge, it is going to be solid if you take it out of the fridge. and it'll only become a liquid when you like put it in the pan to heat it up. But that is a type of fat. It's bacon fat, bacon grease. And if your family doesn't do that, just go along with the imagery there. But lots of people do it. The other type of lipid is an oil. And those are plant products. So oils are normally considered healthier than the fat. They're usually liquid at room temperature. So if you're like trying to be healthy and you're making your fried potatoes in olive oil instead of bacon grease, it's normally healthier. Or any other type of oil. There's like coconut oil or canola oil or just a general vegetable oil. There's lots of different peanut oil. Isn't that the thing? There's lots of different types of oil. And I guess there's lots of different types of fat, but bacon grease is the tastiest. And then these fats are classified in two different ways. The first one is saturated fat. The saturated fats have the maximum number of hydrogens. Since they have so much hydrogen, they are generally solid at room temperature. And these are considered the unhealthy fats, like bacon. The second type of fat category is unsaturated fats, and they have double bonds, so they're not saturated with hydrogens. Since the carbon has double bonds, it means that they don't need the hydrogens to make them happy, and that's healthier. These are the ones that are normally liquid at room temperature. Like I just said, they're considered healthier options. A really good example of a healthy fat is avocados. If you like those are really good for you. And other type of plant products that I mentioned earlier. So I'm just going to go back up here and reiterate that fats are saturated and these oils are unsaturated. Okay, so we've come to the end of our 4 types of organic molecules. We have carbohydrates, we talked about lipids, we talked about proteins, and we talked a little bit about nucleic acids, but guess what? We're going to talk about them more down here. Because there are 2 types of nucleic acids that you hopefully maybe have heard of, but we're going to talk about a little more. So remember, nucleic acids are super important because they contain the genetic information for our bodies, and they and then our DNA then produces any protein, and we know how important proteins are. So it all goes back to DNA and how important DNA is. So DNA is one type of nucleic acid. The other type is RNA. So let us cover DNA first because, I don't know, that's what we're going to be talking about more in this class. So DNA is the shortened form of deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay, so if you're ever like, what molecule of life is DNA? It literally says it in the word nucleic acid. Remember, it is a nucleic acid. It is different than than RNA because it's double-stranded. So I'll just draw a quick one over here. It'll look like that. That's a really poor DNA molecule, but it'll look double-stranded. It has two different strands that join together. And it's twisted. That's what the helix part means, is that it's twisted. And it is made up of the deoxyribose sugar. So I'm going to underline that part. Deoxyribose and deoxyribo. So again, it literally says what type of sugar it has in the name. The sugar it has is deoxyribose. Because it ends in ose, we know it's a sugar. It's deoxyribose. And deoxyribose has these four bases. It has adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. And they pair very specifically, so adenine and thymine will pair with one another, and guanine and cytosine will pair with one another. Okay, so that covers DNA for now. We are going to talk a lot more about it, but those are the basics of why it's different, how it's a different type of nucleic acid than RNA. So RNA stands for ribonucleic acid. RNA is single-stranded, so it's literally just one strand. And since it's not DNA, is it going to have a deoxyribose sugar? No, it's just going to have a ribose sugar. And it has the bases adenine, guanine, cytosine, and uracil. Because things can't be super easy and be exactly the same as DNA. Uracil replaces thymine. So if you ever see uracil in something, you know it's not DNA. Over here, adenine and uracil will pair together, and guanine and cytosine will still pair together. So that is just a brief rundown of the molecules of life. And I need you to bookmark this page. Remember exactly where this page is in your notes, because I promise you're going to be referring to it a lot. We, till the end of school, are probably going to be talking about all of these types of molecules. They are very ingrained in our lives. They're a huge part of biology. So we can literally tie anything back to these four molecules. Okay, so for the big idea, because these four organic compounds making up living things or giving them life, these are the reasons that we can live, is because we are made up of these things. Living organisms are primarily made up of carbon, which we talked about with the CHONSP acronym, that carbon mainly makes it up, our bodies, because we have all these organic molecules that help us live in our bodies. And organic means carbon, so we have lots and lots and lots of carbon in our bodies. And these 4 types of molecules can be pretty abstract to just talk about, which is why I have given you the coloring sheet, or sheet in pictures, whatever you want to call it. So you should have that done, completed, and with this page. Finally, we've come to the last page of our intro notes. So this last page is going to, think of it like an overview, because we've already talked about some of the smallest non-living things in our bodies, and over the course of the entire year, we'll talk about much larger organization of living things, all the way up to community. So starting at the smallest part is the atom, which we talked about in our basic chemistry notes. And the atom, we'll go over it again, is the smallest particle of matter that retains properties of that matter. So one atom of a specific type of element will have those properties no matter what, because it's going to retain those properties. And remember, atoms are in all matter, both living and non-living. I'm even going to underline all, in all matter, living and non-living. So when a bunch of atoms are paired together, they make molecules. And when a bunch of atoms are together, they make molecules. We talked about lots of molecules, those organic molecules that we talked about. Molecules are basically just groups of atoms that are chemically bonded. They share a bond. They're bonded together. The organic molecules of life that we talked about, those 4, lipids, nucleic acids, carbohydrates, and proteins, are found in all living things, but they may still occur in non-living things. Molecules may still occur in non-living things. And remember, inorganic molecules are also found in organisms. Examples of these are water and NaCl, which is salt. And then these molecules, all these different types of molecules, go into making up you at the cellular level. And remember, the cell is the smallest unit of life that carries out the functions of life. So molecules aren't living, atoms aren't living, because they don't reproduce, they don't metabolize, they don't require energy, they obviously don't have cells, they don't grow and develop, and they don't maintain homeostasis, or they don't have to maintain that constant internal environment. Atoms and molecules are not living, but they do make up the living things of cells. Cells, or the cellular level, is the first level of organization, characterizing organisms alone, meaning single-celled organisms. So atoms or molecules alone don't make up an organism, but cells by themselves can make up an organism if they're a single-celled organism. And then we keep going. A lot of cells make up tissues. And tissues are just a group of similar cells that perform a specific function. And this is due to differentiation and multicellularity. So, not every cell in your body is the exact same. Like the cells in your stomach are different than the cells on your skin or the cells in your hair or like your reproductive cells. They're all different because because of differentiation, they are allowed to be different to perform different functions because our skin doesn't have to do the same thing as our stomach cells, so obviously they're going to be a little different. Okay, and a bunch of tissues go into making up an organ. An organ is a structure composed of a number of tissues that work together to perform a specific function. Examples could be your skin, which is the largest organ made up of tissues. Could be your stomach, your spinal cord. There are many different types of organs that are all made up of tissues, which are all made up of cells, which are all made up of molecules, which are all made up of atoms. But going back the other way, organs make up an entire organ system. An organ system is just organs that work together. So there are many different types of organs in your digestive system or in your respiratory system or in your nervous system. Okay, and all of these organ systems go into making up you, or the organism. An organism is defined as a whole functioning being while still made of interdependent parts. So as a human, as an organism, as an animal, we function because we have these organ systems, these tissues and organs, these cells working towards the same goal, which is to keep us alive. So they're interdependent, meaning that they still depend on each other, but they're separate. And then if we have a bunch of organisms, those make up a population. And a population is just a group of the same organisms living in the same place at the same time. So we can talk about the human population because we are all the same type of organism. But we wouldn't talk about the human population and the dog population together because we're not the same type of organism. But if we did want to talk about the human and dog population, we'd consider that a community. Because a community is multiple different populations of organisms living in the same place at the same time. And if you wanted a rough overview of what we're going to be talking about in this class, we'll be talking about all of these. We've already kind of talked about atoms. We'll continue talking about molecules and cells, and then we'll get into the different types of functions that these will perform, and then we'll get into organisms and populations and communities and how they interact, because these are all parts of living things. They're all different levels of organization of living things, and they're all very important in biology.